Hello everyone, Kitsunatu here. Yuzuha's banner is right around the corner, so naturally we're going to be explaining Yuzuha's kit, playstyle, builds, and best teams. I'll be making another one of these videos for Alice in a few weeks, so stay subscribed if you don't want to miss it. Now, let's start off by talking about Yuzuha's kit. If you already know her kit, or you simply don't care for whatever reason, then skip to this timestamp, because there's a lot to talk about. Let's start by talking about what Yuzuha will provide for any given team that she is on. Yuzuha is able to use her EX special and ultimate to inflict enemies with the Sweet Scare status for 40 seconds. When an enemy is inflicted with the Sweet Scare status, the entire party will receive a boost of 1200 attack, 15% damage bonus, and assuming her additional ability is active, an additional 0.2% anomaly build-up rate, 0.2% anomaly damage, and 0.2% disorder damage for every point of anomaly mastery over 100. This buff caps out at 20%. Though reaching the 20% that's needed to fully max out the buff is very difficult if you're not using her with her signature, but we'll talk about that a bit more when discussing her builds. When Yuzuha applies Sweet Scare onto an enemy, the Sweet Scare will take on the element of the agent that attacks it next. So for example, if you EX with Yuzuha and then Quick Assist into Miyabi, the Sweet Scare will take on the Frost element. The element that the Sweet Scare is will become a bit important later. Right now, it's not really meaning anything, but we'll come back to it. Yuzuha's gameplay mostly revolves around generating and making use of her unique resource, Sugar Points. When Yuzuha is off-field and an on-field agent hits an enemy, she will consume 1 Sugar Point to perform an Aftershock attack. And these Aftershock attacks have an internal cooldown of 8 seconds, meaning that you can't just spam the enemy and quick dump all your Sugar Points to perform Aftershock attacks. The anomaly that this Aftershock attack builds is determined by the current element assigned to Sweet Scare. Something cool about these Aftershocks is that their anomaly application will not be factored into the final anomaly damage calculation, and this is the same way that Bang Boos work. So unlike an agent like Trigger, her performing her Aftershock attacks will not diminish the damage dealt by your character's anomaly procs. Something else to note is that when Yuzuha is off-field, her little raccoon friend, who we now know is named Kama, will begin attacking enemies. He works exactly like Lucy's boars and inherits stats in the same way. He honestly doesn't contribute much, besides being literally the cutest thing on earth. But gameplay wise, he doesn't do much but hit enemies for relatively decent damage. I wouldn't say decent. Decent is a very big word to use for something like this. Alright, so to address the elephant in the room, for the most part, Astra is going to be better than Yuzuha on attack and rupture teams, and Yuzuha is going to be better than Astra on anomaly teams. Based on calculations, Yuzuha will be anywhere from 8 to 20% better than Astra on anomaly-based teams, and this wide range mostly comes from how certain endgame stages have anomaly-focused buffs, which dilute the buffs that Yuzuha provides, which makes her less impactful, but regardless, she will be better. Though it's important to note that some testing done by content creators has shown Yuzuha to be better installed than Astra, even on non-anomaly teams. But for most people, Yuzuha will most likely be worse than Astra on most of your non-anomaly teams, but that's something to keep in the back of your head, that there's a possibility that on certain comps, certain stages, and hell, maybe even in general, Yuzuha can be better than Astra. At least that's what people are saying. Time will tell. Before we talk about her W engines, let's quickly talk about her skill level up priority. You will only really level her skills up for the extra days and damage, so you can honestly level whatever you want, but my recommendation would be to get every single skill to level 8 or so, and maybe go a little bit above and beyond for her EX special and her ultimate, because you'll be using those moves a lot. You could also level up her basic attacks, because those are what her aftershocks are, and you can also level up her defensive assist follow-up, because you will also be using that a lot. We will discuss that a little bit later. Now, discussing Yuzuha's engines is pretty simple if I'm being honest, but it's still worth talking about. Of course, Yuzuha's best in slot engine is going to be her signature, but the difference in performance between Yuzuha's signature and R5 Kaboom the Cannon is only 7%, so you won't really have to worry too much about that. The main reason you would want to pick up Yuzuha's signature is to max out her buff, because without it, it's impossible to reach the maximum AM of 200 that's required to maximize her buff. Assuming you're running 2-piece Phaeton's Melody, not running her signature reduces the buff from 20% to 14%, which is only a 6% difference. Technically, I kinda lied earlier, because it's still possible to reach the 200 threshold if you're not using her signature, but that requires you to slap a stat stick engine onto her, and I highly discourage that because the slight decrease in her buff is way less impactful than completely removing the engine effects. So I recommend you just use an engine that doesn't have AM. Now for other options, Any support Wenjin will work perfectly fine. Okay, that's a lie. Not any support Wenjin will not work perfectly fine. Slice of Time is overall really bad. Game Ball doesn't really do much because anomaly agents don't use crit rate. Sukaku's engine will not really work too well because she doesn't perform her EX special often enough. And Astra's signature will not work too well on her because she doesn't perform her EX or ultimate constantly enough to provide enough quick assists to keep uptime of the buff. So those are the ones that don't work. Basically every other one will work, with Kaboom being the best. But a little like option that you can also use, a side grade to Kaboom, that's slightly worse but not by that much, is using Rena's signature engine. That's actually a really good one on her that you can actually use. The only downside to using Rena's engine over Kaboom the cannon, besides like the slight damage decrease, is that you don't get the energy regen from Kaboom, which I think is really useful. But besides that, you can honestly choose whichever one you like the best. Alright, let's move on to talking about the disc drive stats you want to be aiming for. For a user supportive build, you always want to go for slot 4 attack percent, slot 5 attack percent, and a slot 6 anomaly mastery. These main stats will help you get her buffs up to be as high as possible. These are honestly the only viable support main stats for Yuzuha. If you want to DPS Yuzuha as an anomaly agent, you can go for AP, Fizz percent, and AM instead. Or if you want to run her as a crit scaling DPS for whatever reason, you can go attack, Fizz, crit rate, or attack, crit rate, or crit damage. But I'd honestly only recommend using Yuzuha as a support. But you know, if you just want to do it because you think it's going to be fun or really funny, or you want to do a meme build, then you can go ahead and do that. AP, Fizz, AM, or attack, crit damage or crit rate, or you can replace the attack with Fizz percent, whichever one works for you. Now let's talk about what disc drive sets you want to be running with Yuzuha. First off, you'll always want to run her with 2-piece Faithin's Melody for the additional AM so that you can get the most out of her buff. You won't really have to worry about tuning 2-piece Astra or Hormone Punk for the extra attack, because reaching the threshold to maximize her buff is really easy because she'll be giving her team a whopping 40% of her attack, meaning that to get the max buff of 1200, you will only need 3000 attack. Now for the 4-piece sets, you have a few more options. The first option we have here is Astral Voice. Running Astral on Yuzuha will be less valuable than on other supports like even Sukaku or Lucy, because Yuzuha's EX special and ultimate are the only way she offers quick assists, and her EX special is 60 energy, half of the bar, and her ultimate is her ultimate, right? So you won't be performing any of those two moves frequently enough to keep this buff up. So it is an option, it does provide buffs, but it just isn't anywhere near the best option. The next option is Protopunk. Protopunk is just generally a good option all around, due to the fact that you'll be doing defensive assists to generate sugar points. Once again, this is the second time I've mentioned defensive assists and defensive assist follow-ups. We will talk about that in a little bit. The downside to Protopunk is that the 2-piece is literally useless on Yuzuha. It doesn't do anything, right? So it's kind of a waste of a 2-piece. But the 4-piece is good enough to where like you could reasonably use Protopunk and not feel too bad. Swing Jazz is all around a really good option. The only problem with Swing Jazz is that you will have issues keeping the buff up, and you'll have issues with uptime of the buff. But besides that, you shouldn't have too much of a trouble running, this 4-piece. Next is Freedom Blues. Freedom Blues is very interesting because an important part about Freedom Blues is that it only activates with the EX specials, and the aftershocks that Yuzuha does that match like the type of the agent are considered basic attacks. So Freedom Blues will not be just giving you universal anomaly buildup for like every single element in the game, and that's something that you need to keep in mind. But what it will be doing is providing extra anomaly buildup for physical anomaly agents, in which there's currently one, but there's another one coming immediately after her, Alice and Jane. And I honestly feel that if you're running Yuzuha with Alice or Jane, then Freedom Blues might be a really good option, but if not, then you shouldn't really touch Freedom Blues. Generally, I would say Swing Jazz is probably the best option. The buff uptime may be a bit wonky, but it's still really easy to work with. And the 2-piece is actually really good with Yuzuha. It being like energy regen, which allows you to get that EX special I mentioned just a bit more often. So overall, I think Swing Jazz is the best option, and the one that's right behind it will be Protopunk properly. Now I think we should talk a bit more about how Yuzuha generates sugar points. If you play Yuzuha actively, then you will really not have to worry much about keeping her sugar points up. The basic breakdown of her quote-unquote rotation, if you want to call it that, is that you should press EX special sometimes, defensive assist sometimes, always use her chain attack, and on the same note of chain attacks, perform a full team chain attack. Make sure you ult sometimes, but not during the stun window. This wording is actually taken directly from Jstern's Yuzuha guide because I really didn't know any better way to phrase it. So thanks to him for his video. You guys should go and check him out if you haven't. Not that he really needs a shout out from me, of all people, to be honest. There honestly isn't much to talk about when it comes to team building with Yuzuha because it's really simple. Yuzuha works on any team with anomaly agents in them. Her best teams will be disorder teams running double anomalies due to how well she buffs anomaly agents specifically. So any anomaly comp that works well with Astra on them will now work even better with Yuzuha, almost 100% of the time. The only exception to this is Miyabi, because Astra buffs Miyabi's raw damage more than Yuzuha, but the anomaly buffs are still very beneficial. And on top of that, Yuzuha will buff the other anomaly agent paired with Miyabi more than Astra would, and even in hyper carry, Yuzuha is comparable to Astra when it comes to her synergy with Miyabi. Alright, we're at the end of the video. I hope you've been able to actually understand what Yuzuha does. I feel the need to mention that there are still a lot of very interesting aspects of Yuzuha's kit that I did not cover in this video because I wanted to keep it somewhat concise. But I recommend you watch this video by Iamrivenous that goes into a lot of detail regarding her moveset. Now, with all that being said, I've been Kitsunatu, the one and only, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.